Welcome to National Pension Partners, where retirement planning meets peace of mind. Today, we're diving into the 412(e)(3 plan, also known as a fully insured pension plan. This isn't just any retirement plan. It's the gold standard for stability and guaranteed benefits. How does it work? Simple. It's funded exclusively by life insurance and annuity contracts. This means no market risks, no actuarial assumptions, just ironclad guarantees. Think of it like this. You're a small business owner who hates surprises. The 412(e)(3 plan gives you predictable, stable contributions every year. Your future benefits are backed by insurance contracts, so you know exactly what you're getting. No guesswork, no headaches. But there's more. These plans are designed to maximize your contributions and offer significant tax advantages. And with National Pension Partners, you're not just getting a plan. You're getting a team of experts, attorneys, CPAs, actuaries, all dedicated to making your retirement as secure as possible. We provide personalized consulting, ensuring that your plan is tailored to your specific needs. Best part? Initial consultations and proposals are absolutely free. $0, zero commitment. So if you want a retirement plan that's as reliable as your morning coffee, head over to nationalpensions.com. With the 412(e)(3 plan, your future is in safe hands. Retirement planning never sounded so thrilling. Perfect for small business owners who like their finances as predictable as Monday mornings. Stable contributions, ironclad guarantees, and serious tax advantages. It's the trifecta of financial security. And with National Pension Partners, you get a team of brainiacs, attorneys, CPAs, actuaries, ensuring your retirement is as secure as Fort Knox. Oh, did we mention the free consultations? That's right. You get a personalized expert proposal with $0 down. So, if you want a retirement plan that's as reliable as your morning coffee, head over to nationalpensions.com. Because when it comes to your future, boring is the new exciting. Retirement planning never sounded so thrilling. For more details, check out National Pension Partners at nationalpensions.com. Retirement planning never sounded so thrilling.
A lot is going on in the world, and we'll be reporting on that. But then we've also got a very special guest that we'll be bringing on as well. But first, let me tell you what's happening in the world on this particular day, September the 3rd, 2024. Netanyahu has said that he is pushing back over the Gaza hostage deal and is saying that no one will preach to him. So definitely it was a tumultuous weekend for Israel that definitely left Netanyahu with fewer options than ever. And some people are asking, what is the Philadelphia corridor and why is it so important to Israel? So that's definitely something going on in the news. And Russian missiles strike killed 41 people and wounded 180 in the Ukrainian city of Poltavia. So definitely that's something else going on as the Ukraine war is continuing. And of course, we're hearing some comments from Zelensky as apparently Russia launched one of its deadliest strikes against Ukraine. That was what Zelensky had said and others had said as well. And 2 U.S. Marines were attacked during a port visit in Turkey, according to the Navy. So that's something else going on as members of the Turkish National Youth Organization are in custody after an assault on U.S. Marines. So that's something we're seeing. And Beijing-backed trolls are targeting U.S. voters as the election nears. And more than 100 have been killed in a failed Congo jailbreak at an overcrowded prison. So at least 129 were killed during a mass prison break attempt in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So definitely that's something else that is going on in the world and all along those lines. And Pope Francis, battling ill health, begins a historic Asian odyssey. So he starts his longest trip yet as the Catholic Church pivots toward Asia. So definitely it looks like the Pope has landed in Indonesia, where Muslim-Christian harmony is under strain. And looks like sorry, not sorry, is what some folks are saying in Mongolia after the failure to arrest Putin. So Mongolia was meant to arrest Russia's President Putin last night. It didn't, and apparently now it's in trouble. So Mongolia decided to blatantly violate its obligation by receiving Putin, says the Ukrainian foreign minister. So we're seeing that as well. And like I said earlier, Biden and Netanyahu were at odds again after the U.S. president says that the Israeli prime minister is not doing enough in terms of the hostage negotiations and all along those lines. And of course, we do know that Starlink is in Brazil's crosshairs, as they are definitely having a whole spat about it being banned there in Brazil. So Brazil's president says Elon Musk's wealth doesn't mean the world has to accept his far-right ideology. And TikTok is also in the news, as TikTok likely helped the far right in the election, according to researchers, and that's in the area of Germany. So Germany is saying things about TikTok, and of course Brazil saying things about X. So it definitely looks like social media is very much in the news and all along those lines. Let me get to the U.S. news, and then I'll bring in my special guest who's got a very important topic to talk to about as well. And then, of course, we've got our regular panelists, and we'll get into some other discussions as well. So power was cut to 245 homes in coastal California community where landslides were taking place and all along those lines. So I might have to ask Rick, who is here with us, if he's been in any of those areas that have been in the landslide area. And, of course, the presidential campaigns braced for an intense sprint toward election day, and it definitely looks like Trump's hardline New Quest is trying to kind of quell some of Harris's momentum. So definitely it looks like a lot of things will be going on, and I guess we'll try to find out if we're going to have a debate next week, because I think that's scheduled for the 8th of no, not the 8th, but I believe it's on Tuesday, which would be in the middle of the week. It might be the 8th. I've got to look and see when that debate is scheduled, but I do know it's coming up very soon and it's planned, but both parties are trying to figure out when that debate will be and all along those lines. And it looks like an excessive heat watch has been issued for the San Diego County's inland valleys and all in that kind of way. So definitely we're seeing some impact on the weather. And of course, we're also seeing 4 killed in a CTA Blue Line train station shooting near Chicago. So definitely shootings are still very much in the news as well. So that was something else that we're seeing as well. And the U.S. has seized the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro's plane. And so it looks like they seized it in the Dominican Republic. So we'll see how this all plays out in not Middle Eastern, but in South American politics and all along those lines. And tropical developments are possible in the Caribbean and the Atlantic, as we are still in hurricane season. So there might be the possibility of those as well. And there was a shooting in New York as well. So apparently New York City West Indian American Day Parade shooting took place. Shooting was in Brooklyn. It injured 5, according to the police. And definitely that was going on during a festive occasion and all along those lines. And the human remains were found on an Indiana golf course identified as a South Carolina man. So suspected homicide victim has been identified 31 years after human remains found by children in an Indiana field. So that's something else we're seeing in the news. And Harris and Biden court union workers in that battleground of Pennsylvania with on Labor Day and all along those lines. And apparently Waltz was unharmed after some of the vehicles near the back of his motorcade were involved in a crash on yesterday as well. So it just looked like there was some incidents with folks traveling with the campaign and all along those lines. And there's an Ohio town that has landed in the middle of the immigration debate. So definitely that's something else we're seeing as well, as apparently immigration has been a key issue in the Ohio Senate and the presidential race. So definitely it'll be interesting to see what folks have to say about a number of these things. But before we get to that, I'm going to bring in my special guest and see what he's got to say about a very important issue as well. So I'm glad that I've got Mr. Falk with me. Mr. Falk is the guest for today and everything. And I know one of the things that has been talked about is mental health, and a lot, both on this network and other networks as well. And I've had friends and relatives that have dealt with dementia and all along those lines. As a matter of fact, I did not know it was as high as it is, but apparently more than 57 million people worldwide suffer from dementia. And not only does this disease impact mental and physical impairment, but it can also lead to many forms of abuse inflicted by those who are the people that are suffering from dementia are in the care of. And apparently that's something that was going on in your life and everything as you were taking care of your mother. Janie Falk was the matriarch of a wealthy, high society European family. I think that at the beginning of the show, we said that your family's roots are in Switzerland and all along those lines. And I know that in some of the things I had read about you, you were talking about how you had folks take advantage of your mother and all along those lines. So if you just want to share a little bit about your knowledge about dementia and what was going on in your own particular family, because I know that you're the author of Janie and Me, a true story of the evolution and impact of dementia. So if you just share a little bit about what was going on in that space, because it sounds like there could have even been some abuse in terms of financial abuse and maybe even some complicity with some of the lawyers, curators, and other caregivers. And Nick, one of our founders here, is a pension attorney, and you probably noticed that he was running his ad right at the beginning. But if you could just share a little bit about your story and what's going on in that regards.
Well, it's a long story. I looked at my mother's diaries, little 3 by 2 inches books, and deciphered 60 years of her diaries, correspondence, travel logs, etc., to try and find out what had happened. Because over a period of 3 decades, there were manifestation mishaps that gradually increased in severity and consequences, and I soon became aware that something else was going behind the scene. In time, she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and ultimately passed in 2007. And I began to wonder when Parkinson at first manifested in her life, what might have prompted it, and began my work. It took me about 12 years to put my arms around it, and it's not a simple situation. It's difficult to tell when it started, and it's difficult to tell what prompted it. Janie had lived a fairly healthy life, other than having smoked the better part of her life and drinking coffee in profuse quantities. So other than that, she had a productive life. She was very bright. Actually, she had an ability to cut through the mustard and get down to the bottom line of any particular matter that came in front of her. And so the fact that all of a sudden we would be facing those manifestations, for lack of a better word, mishaps, etc., was quite a bit of a puzzle.
Yeah. Do you think that people have been doing enough research into dementia? Because, like I said, I know that I've had relatives that have suffered from that and some that have passed as well and everything. But I just wondering, as one who has been looking at your mom's situation when she was living and everything, do you think that we've done enough research into finding the causes around dementia?
Well, I backed into it. I started looking at the facts, and the research alone took a lot of time, because 60 years is a long time. And also going through her diaries, I encountered names that I was familiar with and that I related to family and friends, but I also ran into names that I didn't know. But it was kind of repetitive, and I thought, well, what are those? And at some point in time, I decided that maybe those are physicians, and I started looking into the physicians she visited, when she visited them, and for what reason, and began putting a map together of what had evolved in her life and what might have influenced the evolution of the disease.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense and everything along those lines. I know that one of the things that you had been concerned about when you did your research was that there were people that might have been taking advantage of her and everything. And I know that I've had friends that have gone into senior living houses and other kinds of houses, and sometimes they are concerned about what's going on in those institutions. So I just wondering how comfortable were you with some of the people that were handling her personal affairs, whether that was lawyers, whether that was some of the doctors and others? And do you think that that is something that takes too much in our society, where there are folks that are abusing some of these elderly folks that need help?
Yeah, at first she was, I would say, until maybe her late 70s, she was fairly independent and able to handle her own affairs. And I think that was fine. But then she recognized that she had a hard time running her own business, and that brought in people from the outside to help her with it. Notably her attorney, and later on a curator or custodian. And that's where things started to unravel from the point of view of control. I had a sister also who in the family who had her own relationship with my mother, and that didn't help because you can have a family and several members in the family, and not everybody agrees as to what the condition is or what to do about it. And that's a source of dissension. And it also opens the door to abuse. And the abuse comes in several forms. It can be mental, it can be verbal, it can be financial, and it's very subtle because you can't be there all the time monitoring conversations and keeping track of the way things are going.
Now, one thing I know about dementia is that sometimes the people that are in that state will sometimes go back in time and remember things that have taken place a long time ago, and they will sometimes imagine things that are taking place that are not factually taking place at that particular time. So you have to have, from my understanding, a great deal of empathy, because they may wind up talking about people that you might not even know, because they might be from their past and all along those lines. So I was wondering, is that something that you had to deal with? Because like I said, I know when my great aunt Elaine was suffering from some of the things she was dealing with, there might be her having conversations with relatives that had passed on, and even some people that were in her life from the past as well. So that was part of what was going on. And did you find that some of the people that were in that caretaking space didn't have the kind of empathy that you would have liked?
Yeah, absolutely. There are memories that date back decades that are crystal clear in the mind of people who suffer from dementia, and Janie was no exception. The problem is the short term. As the disease evolves, they have a hard time remembering what they had for lunch or breakfast or what they did the night before. And it's true also about decisions they might have made, provisions they may have made for their care, for their managing their assets and their retirement, and it gets all too complicated. And so they give different perspective to different people, and it complicates the situation substantially.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And along those lines, before I bring in some of my other panelists, because they may have some questions for you as well, I know that in some families with dementia, there is concern about it being passed from one generation to another or being down in the family lines as well. So I just wondered if that's been any concern of yours, because I do know that sometimes there is the notion that it can be impacted by hereditary influences as well. So what is your take on that? And has that been something that you and your family have thought about or dealt with? Because I do know that in some families it can be down the line of multiple people that are suffering from dementia in the same family line.
Yeah, no, looking at the family as a whole, there was no sign of dementia from a hereditary perspective. So that was new, and I don't think we were quite prepared to handle it. Number one, just understand it, and number two, handle it. And it's not easy to diagnose dementia. I read recently an article about a physician in the Wall Street Journal who suspected he had dementia, and it took him 5 years, despite all the tools he had at his disposal, to arrive at a diagnostic. So it's difficult, and it's convoluted.
Yeah, sounds like it. I know a lot of people were paying attention to mental health, and I'm going to bring in Rick and some of the other guests as well during the time that Biden decided to step out of the whole notion of being the presidential candidate and everything. So I just wondering, do you think that incidences like that have brought it more national attention and all along those lines? Because I know there was a number of concerns about the mental health of our current president and everything along those lines. But I just wanted your take as to whether this may have helped bring some more light to the issue.
All right. The good news about dementia is that so many people will be getting it. Boomers, Gen Xers. And the reason that's good news is because pharmaceutical companies look to where the money is. And the more people who get something, the harder they work on coming up with drugs for it. And we're already seeing some early drugs that help slow it down if you catch it early enough. The drugs are still pretty crappy, but I'm hoping people my age and younger will have better drugs. The bad news is a ton of people will be getting dementia. COVID accelerates brain aging. We have 25 million or more Americans with long COVID. So I think we might double the number of people with dementia in the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, just really quickly along those same lines, Mr. Falk and everything, what kind of treatment was she taking, and did you feel that the treatment was successful? Because I do know that there has been some times that people have tried different drugs, some of them even experimental drugs, and they don't always work and everything. So did you feel that she was getting the kind of care that you would have liked her to have?
Well, I think the kind of care that she got was light on the pharmaceuticals, and the family's business was pharmaceutical wholesale distribution and specialty manufacturing. So we were right there trying to figure out what's going on and what to do about it. And one thing that we found out is that some of the pharmaceutical we was taking were leading her to hallucinate and imagine things that just weren't there. So we went light on this approach, and I had my own suggestion to make as a 26-year-old prostate cancer survivor on a natural approach.
Yeah.
But that wasn't exactly well received. The profession still thinks that you can throw pills at people and resolve the problem. With dementia, the pharmaceuticals have not brought about a great deal of progress. On the contrary, some of the pharmaceuticals on the market now have a propensity to make the brain swell and bleed, and that's not a very good outcome. So we are still going back to the cause of the problem, the air we breathe, the fluids we drink, the food we eat, and other facets that are related to our lifestyle.
Just really quickly, if you share a little bit about your family background, because I do know that in the description I got from you from RTIR, that it was saying that your family was definitely involved, I believe, in Geneva, Switzerland, and everything and you kind of alluded to it, in the pharmaceutical trade and everything. So could you just share a little bit about your own family background? Because I know you're in Norwalk, Connecticut now, but you are originally from Switzerland. Could you just share a little bit about y'all's family history as well?
Yeah, well, my great grandfather started the company back in the late 1800s, and they were selling mineral water. so that was pretty inoffensive. And gradually they got into other products and became wholesale distributors for the pharmaceutical industry, as well as a natural approach to health managing. And it grew, and at some point in time, it was one of the largest, or the largest company in Switzerland for doing this. And ultimately, the company was sold at the turn of the century. And that was that. So 3 generations worked there and tried to make the system better, and I think they did what they should have done. But the pharmaceutical industry, in the meantime, has gone in another direction. And the pharmaceutical industry is maybe trying to solve the problem, but I'm not sure they are solving the problem in a fashion that is altogether productive. On the contrary, I mean, some of the horror stories that we have heard during the pandemic and afterwards have made the problem worse. When I first published my books, we had in the US about 5 million people suffering from dementia. 2 years later on, we had 6 million plus. So, and if it continues like this, it will bankrupt the entire American healthcare system, because it's so expensive to take care of people who have dementia.
Yeah. I saw your hand, Rick, and everything, but Jacoby, you've got family that is in the healthcare profession and everything. So what's your take on Mr. Falk's conversation and the state of our pharmaceutical industry here in the U.S. and all along those lines? And any questions that you may have for him as well. And I'm sure that Nick may have some as a lawyer, but I'll throw it to you, Jacoby, really quickly.
I mean, I'm just listening to the conversation. I mean, it seems because who was it? John Oliver did a piece on hospice care just recently, and he spoke about how we end up there's a lot of problems in healthcare dealing with the elderly and those with, from dementia to Alzheimer's and so on and so forth, where the individuals are always taken advantage of. So, I mean, it's great to hear that you're working in the field to I guess, address this issue. I'm just hoping that there are more ways that we can address this issue.
Just really quickly, Mr. Falk, do you think that there is some cases of people being misdiagnosed? Because I remember a friend of mine that I used to work with at one of our local arts institutions, and she was suffering from serious disease, and she was put in a hospice care and eventually passed away, and all along those lines. But some people thought that they may have put her in hospice too soon. and all along those lines. And I also remember an incident where after she had passed, they were given insurance papers. Her job was and everything, and it seemed like that was a little bit too soon to be given insurance papers, even though you want them to have their affairs settled and everything. But they literally did it at the funeral and everything. So I was just wondering your take on, is it sometimes misdiagnosed, this whole notion of dementia, even among some of our young people?
Well, I think that's a whole problem of diagnostic, and that's why it takes so long to come up to a conclusion as to what exactly is going on, and that's not easy, and different people disagree on the outcome of the diagnostic. It's a difficult field, and dementia takes several forms. Maybe half a dozen of them, and we are starting to address the problem from a whole body perspective, where the brain is not an isolated component of the body, but just part of the whole thing, including the digestive system and other body functions that go with it. So it's a fascinating field. I think that some progress is being made. I addressed that in my book in the last chapter. Some of the things are surprisingly inoffensive in terms of the approach that are being used to bring about some progress, notably in the frequency distributions of music and other material to help people with their disease, and that is very refreshing. But I think we still have a ways to go before we can come up with a more comprehensive approach to resolving the problem of the disease.
P.T. Barnum said there's a sucker born every minute. Our guest says there are 6 million Americans with dementia, but another problem is people with early cognitive decline, pre-dementia. There might be 10 million people like that, and those people, they weren't born suckers, but now they are subject to scams. These are people, mostly elderly, whose thinking has started to get crappy, and these people are preyed on. I've had my mother-in-law, she was always like being victimized, falling for scams. So it's not just full-blown dementia, it's the road to dementia. There are entire industries and even political parties who realize this is a demographic niche that's exploitable and goes after people who are slightly losing it.
Rick, I'll expand on that because Patrick was talking about it's going to bankrupt the country. No, it won't. It'll bankrupt individuals because Medicare does not cover long-term care relating to dementia. In other words, this is a political problem. This is a cultural problem. And here's the government solution. You're on your own, buddy. So what happens is the government is taking zero responsibility for long-term care. So if you get dementia and you don't have a long-term care policy, or you haven't self-insured, or you don't have enough assets, you go bankrupt, go on Medicaid, but they're not going to bankrupt the country over that. It will not be addressed by either political party, neither Republicans or Democrats, because it's a problem with only one solution. And unfortunately, the solution's over here. It is the pharmacy industry. Eli Lilly did come out with a drug that slows dementia down 40%, because apparently it's gunk in the brain that basically kills off your brain cells. But more and better drugs need to be made. And the other problem we have is people are living longer. Now, let's talk about senior abuse. Every state has senior abuse laws because they recognize that seniors are being abused. They get dementia and they try to sell you stuff you shouldn't. But do we have a national policy on that? The answer is no. Again, things that are either one of our parties, and the media is not addressing. By the way, the media won't address the failures of the pharmacy industry, because go look at CBS, ABC, NBC. You know what ads you're going to see? The pharmacy industry. The pharmacy industry basically today owns the news industry. So you need to defend yourself, because Medicare is not going to help you in this particular area.
Long-term care insurance used to be a good deal 40 years ago, because not that many people took advantage of it, because people didn't live as long. And so it was affordable. Now it's not really insurance, it's a prepayment plan, because so many people live to take advantage of it that it's almost a certainty that you're going to take advantage of that coverage. Makes it incredibly expensive and pretty much a bad deal. So what you want to do is what Nick just said, which is accumulate enough assets, if you're lucky and prudent enough, that when you need it, you can pay for your own long-term care, because it's hard to get somebody else to pay for it.
And Mr. Falk, along those same lines, you mentioned it earlier, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, because Sasha is a acclaimed chess player, but he's also an acclaimed musician and everything. And you mentioned this notion of the music and arts being a legitimate way to slow down dementia. And I think you talk about that in your book and everything. So that is not necessarily going the drug route, but if you'll just share a little bit about the research in how music and maybe even the arts and other things can help in dementia care. Mr. Falk?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think the direction is going this way. They now realize that one of the precursor dementia, or a cofactor with dementia, has to do with our smell perception, and as well as our vision acuity. And when people who lose one or the other or both show signs of dementia. We use our vision every day to navigate to our houses, our kitchens, and on the outside with our cars in the countryside. And losing it is very disheartening for the people who experience dementia. Janie was one of them, and she lost herself with her car 2 days in a row, and later realized that something had happened. And so this implies that we need a multi-functional approach to look at those problems and resolve them. And I'm not sure the pharmaceutical industry is going in this direction. I think the research is being done by various organizations throughout the country. I follow MIT for personal reasons, but a lot of work is going on the West Coast at UC Davis and other collegial organizations that look at the problem from a different perspective. And I think that's the way we are going to have to go.
Toby, you had a question? I saw your hand up, and Rick as well.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, outside the box ideas is what could help. For example, I know they've done some studies with games and dementia and other ailments, and those actually have showed help in terms of keeping the brain active. And I agree, the pharmaceutical industry is still, it's Nick's favorite term, the capitalism. It's all about the money, and that's the sad part. And it's not really that the sucker's born. It's just that people figure out ways to game the system to pad their pockets, and that's the sad world we live in. And we end up gaming the system to where it harms many elderly. For example, and this is why I reference back to that John Oliver piece where he did about hospice care, which is similar to dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's in those patients. You had companies that gamed the system to keep people basically in there. They misdiagnosed them because they wanted to keep them on the payroll. Well, keep the money coming in based on the amount of money that they get for having an individual in hospice. And there were individuals that weren't even dying, but they kept them in care for like 5 years because they got a check. And that's similar to what goes on with dementia. So it's a priority thing. I think we have to figure a way in our society to prioritize this care more so than prioritizing the bottom dollar. And we run into that problem.
Just really quickly, Mr. Falk, along those same lines, I know we're talking mostly about America because that's where the 6 million figure came from and everything, but how much of it is a problem in other parts of the world as well? Because Pod TV is a global network, so I'm just wondering, is it something that we're seeing on the African continent and the Asian continent and other parts of the world other than here in the U.S.? Like I said, I know that your family has European ties with that whole Switzerland business and everything, but how are you finding it being dealt with in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I mean the thing is that especially in the U.S. the cost picture is unsustainable. Our healthcare system on the average costs 80% more than the comparable care in the 26 European Union countries. And you just can't go on like this. The hospices are playing a role. We need other organizations to play a role in dementia. And depending on the countries or the states, the help is there. But there comes a point where the situation gets out of hand and this becomes out-of-pocket costs, and it costs dearly. And
let's go back to how staying mentally active protects against dementia. So every neuron in your brain is connected to 1,000 other neurons, and Alzheimer's breaks the connections, chokes off the neurons. But if you stay mentally active, even as your brain is turned to Swiss cheese, if you built enough connections, you can still find your way through your brain to still have coherent thoughts. There was a famous study of nuns who lived to be very old and stay very mentally active, and they found low levels of dementia. The nuns all had their shit together, but on autopsy, their brains were Swiss cheese, but they managed, because they kept active and kept building connections, they were able to fight the effects of dementia.
Apparently that's been the argument that chess players have had. Arnold Denker, who was a grandmaster player, said, well, you don't see chess players with dementia. And frankly, he was right, because it's hard to play a tournament game and have dementia at the same time because you can't remember all the lines. But the theory is, what you're saying, Rick, it's like exercising. You know, as you get older, your muscles start deteriorating. If you don't exercise, you're going to lose muscle mass. I mean, it's just the way it is. You're going to lose it at a rapid rate if you don't exercise at all. You lose it at a lower rate if you exercise some. And the theory is the same with your brain. If you don't exercise your brain, then what happens? Your brain's going to deteriorate, but deteriorate at a more rapid rate because you're not exercising your neurons. And hence, chess, video games, music, all slow down the progression of.
But Nick, what do you say? And maybe Nick, what do you say? And maybe Mr. Falk has some ideas of this as well. But the thing that I understand from scientists is that we as humans in general only use about 10% of our brain and our brain power in general.
That's kind of a myth.
Yeah, that's garbage. That's a weird saying that popped up. I don't think.
Right. Yeah, Jacoby. I think that's a myth. But go on, Jacoby.
Actually, there was some interesting technology that came out, but I think it's going to be scary to work with. I don't know if you guys have followed CRISPR. That was something that they were talking about this weekend. I think it was Fareed Zakaria did a whole piece on CRISPR, how that's dealing with going through your. Basically what CRISPR does is it goes through your DNA and finds those pieces that lead to, or those pieces within your DNA which lead to these areas later down the line. It chops it out and replaces that DNA. It's an interesting technology. I'm fearful of it, but that is something that I think they're also looking at in terms of dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's. So that could be a thing down the line that we're, dealing with trying to figure out ways to attack dementia.
Yeah, and you're going to see more people
Hold on
have
a
it.
second. Hold on a second. I had a question for Mr. Falk because he kind of alluded to it earlier. But how much does food and what we do in terms of our body intake also impact our dementia? Because there have been a couple of recent studies, including one on Very Well Health a couple of days ago, that there are signs of dehydration in both our young and older children, and I'm sure that goes on in our older citizens as well. So how much, and of course, as we know, a lot of us are eating processed food and everything. So how much does the diet that we eat and the things that we put in our body impact our propensity to get the dementia from what your studies are hearing, Mr. Falk?
Well, we know that our food supply has deteriorated over the decades, and we don't have the content that we used to have in the food that we eat to sustain a healthy lifestyle. So the first thing is to clean up the food chain. But we've got to do the other things too. We've got to stay, as was pointed out, we've got to stay active. So it's not only diet and nutrition, it's exercise, meditation, staying socially connected, playing card games, meeting with your buddy, and following local events, etc. Staying engaged. It's a whole thing. We have become sedentary, and since the pandemic, isolated, and that's not a healthy environment to live in.
There's also false dementia, which often can be easily cured. If you have an elderly loved one who goes within a couple days from knowing what's going on to being totally confused, you can check them for a UTI, a bladder infection. And in elderly people, just having a UTI, and I've seen it in my relatives and in-laws, can simulate total dementia. You give them some antibiotics, the dementia goes away because it wasn't really. It was also some drugs like like our guest mentioned. Can make it look like you have dementia, and you really need to be pulled off the drug.
And Mr. Falk, along those same lines and everything, there has been speaking of the pharmaceuticals, because I've seen them advertising a number of times, there have been people that have been concerned about shingles. So apparently shingles is on the rise and everything. And there was a recent study, I think it was last week, that says that shingle infection can be linked to the risk of cognitive decline. Now, of course, there are certain pharmaceutical companies that are pushing their products to fight against shingles. So I wonder how much of that is actuality that the shingles is actually linking to the cognitive decline, or how much is that the pharmaceutical companies trying to sell their particular product and everything. So I'm just wondering your thoughts around that, because I have heard a number of people that say that shingles is on the rise.
Yeah, I think I was alluding to the problem of the connection of dementia with the rest of the body, including the digestive system. And we are finding now that pathogens that we either inhale or ingest find their way into the digestive system, and they create the kinds of problem that was just alluded to. In addition to dementia, autism, and other sorts of ailment that we suffer from. So I think it's just a beginning. We are starting to understand and realize that we've got a problem, a basic problem, that we are making our people sick. and we need to find a way to get out of this spin in which we are into, and come out at the other end with a healthier, more productive way of living. We've become sedentary, and we were never meant to be sedentary, be sitting in front of the TV all day long or hours long, and be healthy as a result. It just cannot continue like this.
And Mr. Falk, how much do you think we pay enough attention to brain health? Because I do know that I've had some friends and acquaintances that have suffered, and including some that have passed away from brain aneurysms and things along those lines. But sometimes it's not until after that major incident happens that folks even pay attention to what's going on in the brain. And like I said, I do know that there are, what I alluded to earlier, and yes, I did know that those studies were probably inflated, but I don't know that we are even using the entirety of our brain, and maybe 10% is way too low and everything. But I do wonder if we're using enough of our brain and if we're paying enough attention to brain health. A lot of times we're paying attention to the more physical health, like how our stomach mass is and things along those lines. But do you think that we pay enough attention to our health of our brain?
Well, I think we are working our way to this. Some institutions have developed fiber optic that can be inserted in the brain and in the guts to take measurements of what is happening in those body parts and better understand the problem. So we are putting the essentials together to better understand the disease and be more intelligent about it. But in the bottom line of it is that we've got to go back to the way we were feeding ourselves and the way we were active in our lives to restore some sort of normalcy to our lifestyle.
That makes a lot of sense. We've only got a few more minutes to go and everything. I'm sure that maybe Rick and others have questions, but I didn't know if Sasha had some thoughts or things around what's going on in this regards, and if he had any questions for you as well and everything. But definitely glad to have this conversation with you and bring this issue to the forefront. But Sasha, I'll turn it over to you to see if you had any questions for Mr. Falk.
He needs to unmute himself.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Well, I believe that for the program of World Edition, this medical discussion is a little bit out of place. And, with all my respect, I will just continue to listen to what you have to say.
Fair enough, and I know that we've got issues that are coming up with Ukraine, Russia, and China later on and everything. But like I said, I think that World Edition is a show that brings various issues to the forefront and not always just the political things. But that's just my opinion and everything. But
so I have a tip. Ride herd on your elderly relatives. Check in with them a ton because they'll tell you they're okay and they might think they're okay. But if they're starting to lose it, they will be victimized. My mother-in-law almost bought $30,000 of new windows for her house, totally didn't on the basis of a phone call. Somebody got to her. If you still have a landline, which we do because we're old, we're lazy, you get calls, a bunch of calls, crap calls a day. If you answer and you sound old, they'll keep talking to you. If you answer and go, what? They're like, oh, this is a person who still has their shit together. They hang up. And your elderly relatives, people are trying to scam them many times a day.
It's because they have the money. Toby has
Right, they have a ton of money.
They have a ton of money. Yeah.
I was just going to say, people try and scam anybody, anytime. Catfishing is a real thing. It doesn't matter if you're old, young. It's just one of those things that you got to watch out for, especially with the technology that's out there with emails, even with texts. Be careful, even in the text scenarios. But that's for anybody. But yes, definitely the elderly. The better thing is check in on those you care for. That's a big thing. But in terms of mental gymnastics to keep everybody's mind going and thinking, I saw something. Well, I'm a big nerd, so I like to read a lot, like to look at a lot of different things. But this is something that, I guess keeps my mind going, and it's very random and out there. So, Mr. Falk, I hope this is something fun for you. But thinking about space, how if they're saying that the galaxies are all moving away from each other. However, there's something out there called the Great Attractor. If you ever look it up, it's actually pretty cool. And people talk about a torus shape that the universe could be, or the whole galaxy and everything could be. But if you think about it, we have a great attractor that's out there that's supposedly bringing everything to one point, yet they're saying everything is spreading out, or the galaxy is expanding. It's just interesting to think about the mental gymnastics. These are the things that pop in my head just randomly. So that's some fun stuff for everybody to think about while we talk about trying to keep everybody.
We've only got about another 5 minutes and everything. But Mr. Falk, that's just one of the things that you talked about in your book, was this fact that a number of people were abusing your mother and everything. So if you just want to share a little bit about that, you kind of alluded to some of them being some of the caretakers and everything. And what advice would you give to people that to find ways to make sure that they are not being taken advantage of, which is part of what we've been talking about this whole time and everything?
Yeah, the elderly abuse comes in basically two forms. One is the groups that you're familiar with, so the caretakers, the family members, the lawyers, the curators, guardians, etc., is one part of the equation. This part typically doesn't get reported. 1 in 10 and as much as 1 in 44 will report abuse of that kind. The perpetrators may be family members. They may be the person who suffers from dementia may love them, and they are reluctant to report them. So we don't know very much about the damage that it is done at this level. The bigger damage is done by the outsiders, and I think we just heard some examples of that. And a number of organizations have made an effort to quantify this. AARP, Consumer Reports, and other organizations have come up with numbers that applies that the yearly damage is in the $30 to $40 billion a year. So that's a substantial number, and various organizations at the state level, principally, are trying to alleviate this problem and moderate it. Some banks are keeping track of excessive and too frequently withdrawal made from bank accounts of seniors. Physicians are keeping an eye on potential elderly abuse together with local police and other related organizations. So I think everybody realizes that there's a problem. Everybody is trying to moderate it, but it's a monumental problem, one that we have failed to address in a comprehensive manner up to now. So,
one thing you can do with elderly relatives is get family histories. Patrick, you're lucky that your mom left a ton of diaries. But when you lose somebody, not everybody does that, but you lose everything they know. And you may not want to talk to your uncle or grandma because you hate their politics. So don't talk about politics. Get an ancestry membership and ask them about all these relatives, and you'll find out amazing stuff, like who was having affairs and just crazy crap that is good to know and keeps telling those stories, keeps your elderly relative mentally active. And once they're gone, those stories are gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a very close relationship with my parents, including my mother, but I never knew some of the details that I uncovered by going through my mother's diaries and her correspondence. And some of it is hair raising. So, well, I thought I knew this person, but then I didn't.
Yeah, we do talk about senior abuse. And again, the thing is, it's a state by state issue. It's like abortion. People don't know how important it is what state you live in. It's not you live in the United States. You live in the state of Connecticut, part of the United States. And we're seeing that right now with the policies toward abortion, but it also exists on all other facets of the law. It's the state of Connecticut that has or doesn't have good senior abuse laws. I do know in California, because I've seen some legal action taken by the district attorneys over there for people that are engaged in senior abuse over where you're at. And Rick, in California, they have some very strict senior abuse laws.
Because we have famous people, and like when Charles Bronson, 80 years old, marries some woman who's 32, and she starts taking all his money, then when a famous actor gets scammed, it gets a ton of publicity.
Right.
Well, just to say that
state law issue, and the thing is, the federal government tends to not get engaged in senior abuse. So if you live in North Carolina, you better check out the North Carolina laws, which could be totally different than California. So the person who sells you junk in North Carolina maybe will get away with it, but couldn't get away with it in California.
Just to say, in California is where the hospice abuse is most prevalent. So it's not really that area is one thing, but people are finding ways to get around it. So we cannot say that the safety of California, because they're there's just more abuse there because people have figured out ways to game the system. We have to get back to, again, figuring out ways to change our priorities as a society to worry about those elderly and not take advantage of the elderly. And when that happens, come up with some type of regulation and some type of way to protect them better. Because yes, elderly abuse is horrible.
Yeah, and the other thing is our educational system and our media doesn't discuss this, a very important topic. This would bankrupt Medicare, which is one reason it's not covered, and politicians don't want to even go there. But Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. So if you do have an elderly person and you don't have a sinking fund for them, you don't have any person to cover them, they will go bankrupt. They will go bankrupt independently. And then they go on what they call state-supported Medicaid. So now you're back on the Medicaid system and the individual states covering you. But as you go through life, no one tells you, well, Medicare doesn't cover that. Now, in the pension area I work with, and there's actually a code section called 401H, and you can actually pre-fund with tax-deductible dollars coming out tax-free your long-term care. It's a weird section that doesn't exist in 401ks, doesn't exist in normal retirement plans. But notice what happens. This could be a federal solution by changing the 401H code and allowing it to be put into 401ks or put into profit sharing plans or other than pensions. And they're encouraging people, and that would encourage people to have the long-term care insurance, which would be unaffordable if it's not tax deductible.
So what happens to 401H money that isn't used if you're lucky enough not to?
I'm glad you asked. The law doesn't really it's not, they have made it not clear as to what happens on it. Is it forfeited back to the plan, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So they kind of left it open, which is
so my wife
sad.
is always saying long-term care, long-term care. I'm like, now we'll just build up. So would you recommend long-term care, 401H?
It depends on the age of the participant. As they get older, we do discuss it with them. Like a 40-year-old, we generally say it's available, but look, you're 40, by the time you're going to need the policy, it's like 30 years. The world can change so much. But when we get a 60 or 70-year-old, we do discuss it with all of them because, hey, look, this is real.
Going on right now and everything, but
Mr.
Falcon, you can tell us how you can get your book and everything, and we will definitely put the book on our bookstore as well. But definitely, you can let us know how we can reach you if you're interested in getting that book and all along those lines, and definitely just how people can reach you to learn more about your book that you wrote and everything. And I've definitely enjoyed having you on as a guest and everything.
Well, I think we've got, as a nation, we've got to do a better job than we are doing with regard to our own people. And when you look at it on a world perspective, the United States healthcare system is number 26 behind every other industrial nation on the ranking of the quality of care. And so whether we are dealing with our veterans or our elders, we've got to step up to the plate.